For 15 years, millions of people were sold a beautiful lie. Smiling faces, desert sunsets, and the promise of one big happy family. But while the cameras were rolling and the fairy tale was playing on your screens, something else was happening quietly behind the scenes. Money was disappearing, relationships were rotting, and a family was being slowly, deliberately dismantled from the inside. I stayed quiet for years, but silence only protects the people doing the damage. I'm done protecting them. What you're about to hear isn't edited, softened, or wrapped in fake tears. It's the version that was never meant to leave the house. People always ask how one wife ended up living out of an RV while another settled into a mansion worth millions. They ask why a father stopped calling his own children. They blame rules, stress, or reality TV pressure. But that explanation is too comfortable. The truth is far uglier. This wasn't chaos. It was strategy. A slow financial and emotional execution that played out over more than a decade. Everything starts with the money. In our family, there was this idea called the family pot. On paper, it sounded noble. Every paycheck, every TLC check, every side business was supposed to flow into one shared pool so everyone was taken care of equally. That's what the audience was told. What the audience didn't see was who controlled that pool and who quietly drained it. Equality doesn't exist when one person holds the keys and everyone else is guilted into not asking questions. When Robyn entered the family, she didn't come in empty-handed emotionally or financially. She brought massive credit card debt, the kind built from years of spending she couldn't afford. Thousands of dollars. And the cleanup didn't come from the man who married her. It came from the women who had already sacrificed everything. Yanelle, who worked real jobs for decades, cashed out her own retirement savings to erase that debt. Not for herself, not for her kids, but for someone who had never contributed a dollar to keeping the family afloat. That should have been the warning sign. Instead, it became the blueprint. As the years passed and the move to Flagstaff happened, the family pot stopped being communal in any meaningful way. While some were told to tighten belts and live smaller, one house kept growing bigger. And that house wasn't just large, it was overflowing. Shelves packed with expensive collectibles, artwork worth more than college tuition, jewelry stacked like trophies. All of it purchased under the claim of struggling just like everyone else. Meanwhile, siblings were working physically exhausting jobs and worrying about medical bills. The contrast was sickening. The most disturbing part wasn't even the spending. It was how it was enforced. Anytime one of the original wives asked to see numbers or wanted transparency, the reaction was explosive. Questions became accusations. Wanting clarity became disloyalty. Religion and patriarchy were weaponized to shame the very women whose money kept the lights on. They were told they were selfish for asking where their own income was going. That kind of manipulation doesn't happen by accident. By the mid-2020s, the truth was impossible to hide. What had been presented as a shared family system was actually a wealth transfer. Retirement funds drained. Home equity pulled. Futures sacrificed. All to build security and comfort for one household. This wasn't mismanagement. It was intentional. A decade-long extraction dressed up as faith and family. And the damage didn't stop with money. It spread to the kids. For years, viewers saw Robyn's children as fragile outsiders who just couldn't blend in. What they didn't see was the invisible fence built around them. A constant narrative that the rest of us were unsafe, disrespectful, or threatening. We grew up loud, close, and fiercely bonded. We tried to bring them into that chaos with open arms. Every time, we were pushed back. Normal sibling behavior was reframed as danger. Disagreements became bullying. Noise became trauma. Slowly, her kids were taught that loyalty to their mother meant distance from everyone else. It was subtle, but it worked. By the time COVID hit, that invisible fence turned into a concrete wall. Brothers and sisters were rebranded as risks. Work, friendships, and independence were framed as betrayal. Those kids didn't drift away. They were isolated. And the tragedy is that isolation followed them into adulthood. A mansion became a cage. Safety became control. And sibling bonds were sacrificed so one woman could remain the center of everything. Now here's the part they're panicking about. The money is gone. For years, the lifestyle was propped up by multiple incomes flowing into one direction. But when the original wives left, they didn't just leave emotionally. They took their financial stability with them. Businesses, skills, common sense. What's left is a massive mortgage, mounting debt, and two people trying to sustain a five-earner lifestyle alone. The rumors about financial trouble aren't exaggerations. They're consequences. Loans taken just to cover taxes. A property they can't build on because it was never properly paid for. A house stuffed with expensive upgrades that no one wants to buy because it's a monument to excess. They pushed everyone away to protect their dream, only to realize the dream depended on the people they mistreated. And still, blame is everywhere but where it belongs. Former wives, children, the economy, anyone except the choices that created this collapse. The show is the only thing holding it all together now, which is why desperation hangs in the air. Without cameras, there's no cushion. Without drama, there's no paycheck. That's why the idea of a new wife keeps floating around. Not because of faith or love, but because new blood means new storylines and new money. But here's the contradiction. The woman who fought hardest to eliminate competition also needs that competition to survive financially. She wants exclusivity and luxury, and those two things no longer coexist. It's a deadlock between ego and reality. Behind all of this, another battle is quietly unfolding over land. Property that was paid for with one woman's life savings while ownership was intentionally blurred. Yanel saw it coming. She checked the math. She followed the paper trail. And now she's demanding answers. Forensic answers. Receipts. That terrifies a man who relied on volume and intimidation instead of facts. This time, yelling won't work. She's fighting for her children's future, and she's not backing down. Then there's Mary. For years, she was emotionally frozen out but financially kept close. Given just enough hope to stay, just enough rejection to remain insecure. Her loyalty was used as leverage while her success funded a household she wasn't welcome in. When she finally left for real, she didn't just walk away. She cut the cord. And that quiet exit did more damage than any public fight ever could. Now the rebrand has begun. Victims instead of villains. Betrayed instead of responsible. History rewritten as if 3 marriages and 18 children were some kind of misunderstanding. But there's a problem with that narrative. The audience remembers. There are 15 years of footage that contradict every tear-soaked speech. What they never anticipated was the kids. We didn't fracture the way they expected. We compared notes. We talked. We built our own support system. Boundaries replaced fear. Accountability replaced obedience. The power shifted, and once it did, there was no going back. And then there's David. The man who didn't need to say anything to dismantle an ego built on control. He just showed up. Consistently. Quietly. For birthdays. For weddings. For the moments that matter. While one man demanded respect, another earned it by being present. That contrast is impossible to unsee, and it exposed the lie at the heart of everything we were told to accept. In the end, the biggest irony is this. The woman who won ended up alone with the version of the man everyone else escaped. No buffers. No distractions. No one left to blame. Just resentment echoing through a house full of expensive things and empty relationships. People call this family a failure. I don't. I see an escape. 3 women who rebuilt their lives. 18 siblings who refused to be divided. A legacy that didn't die, but finally became honest. The mansion might still stand, but it's no longer the center of our world. We stepped out of the lie and into something real. This isn't the end of a story. It's the end of pretending. And honestly, life has never felt more free. For 15 years, the world was hypnotized by a carefully staged illusion. Smiles were practiced. Unity was rehearsed. And a family was packaged as something sacred and untouchable. But behind that polished image, something ugly was happening in slow motion. Money was being quietly siphoned. Voices were being suppressed. And a family wasn't falling apart by accident. It was being dismantled with precision. I stayed silent for a long time because silence was expected. Silence kept the peace. Silence kept food on the table. But silence also made me complicit. And I'm done carrying that weight. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you understand it, the whole fairy tale collapses. People always ask how everything went so wrong so fast. How one woman ended up counting pennies while another lived surrounded by luxury. How a father slowly vanished from the lives of his own children without ever physically leaving. They blame stress, rules, or fame. That version is comforting. It lets the guilty sleep at night. But it isn't the truth. The truth is, this was planned. Everything in our family revolved around money, even when we pretended it didn't. We were told we were equal. We were told everything went into one shared system for the good of everyone. That idea was sold as proof of love and faith. But equality dies the moment one person controls access and everyone else is punished for asking questions. When a new wife entered the family, she didn't come in neutral. She arrived drowning in debt, spending habits she couldn't afford, and expectations she never earned. And the rescue didn't come from the man who vowed to provide. It came from the women who had already sacrificed everything. One of them entered her retirement, her future, to erase another person's financial mess. No gratitude. No accountability. Just expectation. That wasn't generosity. That was conditioning. From that moment on, the rules were clear. Some people were allowed to take. Others were expected to give and smile while doing it. As the family moved and rebuilt, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. While certain households were told to downsize and endure, one household expanded without limits. Bigger space. More comfort. Endless purchases disguised as necessities. Expensive clutter piled higher every year, all while claiming hardship with a straight face. Inside the family, we could see it. We just weren't allowed to say it. And if anyone dared to question it, punishment followed. Asking for transparency was labeled betrayal. Wanting clarity became disloyalty. Religion and loyalty were twisted into tools of control. The women funding the lifestyle were shamed into believing they were greedy for wanting to know where their own money went. Fear replaced trust, and obedience replaced partnership. That's when the family truly broke, not publicly, but internally. We learned quickly that survival meant silence. That love was conditional. That security depended on how useful you were to the system. And the children felt it before we could explain it. We saw which doors were always open and which ones stayed locked. We saw who mattered and who was disposable. This wasn't dysfunction. It was design. And this was only the beginning. Once the imbalance was set, it didn't stay limited to money. It seeped into everything. Time, attention, even basic human decency started being rationed, and somehow the same household always ended up with more. We were told this was normal. We were told this was what sacrifice looked like. But sacrifice was never shared equally. It always flowed in one direction. What made the situation truly toxic was the enforcement. Control wasn't loud at first. It was subtle. A look. A tone shift. A reminder of loyalty. And if that didn't work, fear finished the job. Any wife who asked for clarity was branded as difficult. Any concern was reframed as bitterness. Slowly, everyone learned that staying quiet was safer than being honest. Inside the family, one house became untouchable. That space was treated like a sanctuary, protected from criticism, protected from consequences. While others were juggling bills, working exhausting jobs, and worrying about their kids' futures, that house filled up with luxury disguised as necessity. Expensive decor. Collectibles stacked like trophies. Jewelry that cost more than education. And yet, the narrative never changed. We're all struggling. Saying it often enough was supposed to make it true. But the kids weren't blind. We saw siblings working their bodies to exhaustion just to cover basic needs. We saw medical care delayed. We saw stress written on our mothers' faces. And then we'd walk into another space where comfort was overflowing, where worry seemed optional. That contrast plants resentment deep in a child's chest, even if they don't have the language for it yet. And then came the gaslighting. If a mother questioned why her child was doing without while another household thrived, she wasn't met with answers. She was met with anger. She was told she was jealous, ungrateful, disloyal. The conversation was never about money. It was about obedience. fall in line, or be punished emotionally. This dynamic didn't just break marriages. It rewired the family. Love stopped being unconditional. It became transactional. If you agreed, you were favored. If you resisted, you were frozen out. Children learned quickly which parent was safe to talk to and which one could make life harder with a single decision. As the years went on, something even darker happened. The system started feeding on the people it was supposed to protect. Retirement funds disappeared. Home equity was drained. Futures were traded for comfort that benefited the same two people over and over again. This wasn't poor planning. It was extraction. And it only worked because everyone was too afraid of the fallout to stop. By the time cracks started showing publicly, the damage was already done. Relationships were hollow. Trust was gone. And the family everyone thought they knew was already dead. It just hadn't been pronounced yet. What you were watching on television was the performance. What we were living was the aftermath. And the worst part? This was still only the setup.